In my last video, I shared that there was a time when I had done pornography in my marriage and got caught doing it. And much to my embarrassment and shame, I had to confess to my wife, who had inquired as to whether I'd done something inappropriate. She drilled deeper and deeper, and eventually I had to admit that I had been on the internet looking at pornographic pictures. Took a day to think about it, my wife did. Came back, we had a chat, and here's what she said, and you'll remember this from the previous video. She said, Jeff, if you want to do pornography, I'm not going to try to stop you to do that. I'm not going to exercise my energies to try to keep you from doing it, try to get you to avoid doing it, and trying to hold you accountable to doing it. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it, and I'm not going to stop you. But here's the deal. If you feel like you have to do pornography and you're going to do pornography, then we really can't be close to each other. We've had a very close relationship over the previous 10 to 15 years in our marriage, probably 10. And we've been very close, and we've had a great relationship, and we've enjoyed each other, and but you know what? If you want to be close like that and continue to be close, you can't be doing pornography. You can't be bringing other women into our relationship. You can't be lusting after them, having sexual experiences regarding them, seeking them out, watching them, looking at them being naked. If you want to do pornography, we really can't be close. If you want to be close, then you're going to have to give up pornography. And I can't make that choice for you. I'm not going to divorce you, but it's impossible for me to draw near to you intimately, vulnerably, nakedly, and otherwise if you're doing that with other women. So you need to make up your mind. And as I said in our previous video, she didn't yell, she didn't shout, she didn't scream. She was very matter of fact and very, very patient about it, but she was very firm about it. She just said, you can't have both. Jeff, you can't have both. If you want this, I'm not going to stop you, but here's the consequences from it. If you want this, a close relationship with me, then you have to give up pornography, but it's got to be your choice. I can't make you make that decision. Now, for me, is that the question that is I wanted to pose here is that a legitimate thing for my wife to do? Those of you who have watched this video might be saying, the wife might be saying, no, I wish I could do that, but I can't do that because I've got the husband over here and so forth and so on. Otherwise, might be saying, absolutely, it's legitimate for her to do that. The husbands, lots of husbands might be saying, no way is that a legitimate thing for a wife to say to her husband. Or there may be husbands who would say, yeah, it's entirely legitimate for her to have said that to me. Let me tell you what I think about that, about what she said and whether it was legitimate. I think it's extremely legitimate that my wife say what she said to me that evening when we sat down together to talk about what had happened the day before when I had delved into and dabbled into pornography for about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. I think it's extremely legitimate. Now, here's the reason why. The reason why it was legitimate, extremely legitimate for her to say that to me, and not getting me in a headlock, not choking me, but just simply saying, there are choices in life, and Jeff, you have to make your choice. Well, here's why I think it's legitimate. It's legitimate because it's in the context of sex. The Bible is very, very clear about sex being something that is an extremely unique thing. Sex is meant to be between one person, and that is you and your wife or you and your husband, not to be shared with others. And if you share that experience of nakedness and intimacy and lust and passion and intercourse and orgasm, when you share that experience with somebody else, God says that's so horrible that you have grounds to get a divorce. There's only one ground for divorce, apart from abandonment. And what is that one ground? Well, it's got to be something really, 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 really awful for one to be able to have the permission to get divorced. And that is if one commits sexual immorality or if one commits adultery in the course of their marriage. So it is legitimate And it was legitimate for Donna, my wife, to say to me in so many words, Jeff, this is a crucial area. There's a lot of ways and a lot of areas where we might compromise with each other and give a little bit and give a little bit and get a little bit. We might work out some compromises in a whole lot of areas, and we've done that. We've worked out a lot of compromises over the 40 years that we've been married. But what she was saying to me at that day was, there's no compromising in this area. I can't I can't give in a little bit here. I can't let you share our private sexual experience with somebody else, even in a little way. That it's either exclusively me and you give it up with others, or if you're going to do it with others, and you're giving it up with me, because there's no compromise. And I think that's very biblical for my wife Donna to have taken that stance, and in kindness and in love, but nonetheless with clarity. And I wouldn't even say, I would retract what I said earlier about her being firm. She wasn't wagging her finger and being firm this way. She was simply saying, I can't compromise in this way. If you want a little bit of pornography, then you can't have me. But if you want me, then you've got to, there's simply no compromise in this particular area. So I think it was a very legitimate thing for her to do, and for any wife to do as she approaches her husband if they're struggling in this particular area. Now, that was fairly easy for me to hear. It was blunt. It was a real wake-up call. It was it was I I was shocked, I guess, to a sense. But on the other hand, it was very easy for me to say, I agree with you that there's no compromise here, and I am going to be done with pornography because I do want us to be close. But it was fairly easy for me because 5 or 6 years earlier than, no, I'm sorry. If we said had that conversation 10 years into our marriage, 5 years prior to knowing her, I had begun, God had worked in my life in a very deep way, and He showed me there was to be no compromising in this area. So, 5 years previous to marriage, I had set a course of having nothing to do, giving no outward expression to lust, sexual immorality. I had for 5 or 6 years committed myself as a single person to be sexually pure, sexually faithful to God, and sexually self controlled. I had learned how to do that. I had acquired that level to where my sexual energies were very minor. They weren't gone, of course, they were minor, but they were very manageable. They were not managing me. I had learned how to manage them for about 5 or 6 years. And as I entered into marriage, then, for the first 10 years of our marriage, I had continued to manage those sexual desires and passions and lusts. And they were not managing me, I was managing it even in the first 10 years of our marriage. And I had not been doing pornography. So for about 15 years, I had learned how to day and week to week and month to month, learn to acquire a degree of sexual self-control and sexual purity and sexual faithfulness. So when she said to me, you can't have both, it was a fairly easy thing to do because I wasn't governed and ruled and controlled by these passions and lusts and by sexual temptation. Now, but I know that my life is not typical for the average man who finds themselves now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, who grew up in a very different time. Men of those ages have grown up where the sexual revolution has taken deeply root in our culture. And now our culture is like Corinth, where sex is promoted and advertised and sought out and approached and tempted to people in every street corner. And Corinth was a very sexualized, liberated sexually, in a sense, society and culture, where sex was advertised on every street corner. And so we live in that kind of a society. The men now in their 20s and 30s and 40s have lived in a culture much like Corinth, where sex is advertised on every street corner, on every advertisement, every billboard, every TV show, every movie, every advertisement. Now, men in their 20s and 30s and 40s have been saturated with sexual temptation. and perhaps have given into those sexual temptations as a single person. And now they have acquired a huge, huge appetite. No longer is it manageable to them, but they may be having given in to those sexual temptations 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, looked at pornography for 1 decade or 2 decades. Now, that sexual lust is really managing that single person, or or perhaps that married person as well. And so they may be finding themselves in a very, very difficult and complicated matter of where they want to be married, but now they've got this pornographic craving, strong appetite. It's managing me. I'm not managing it. I've come to realize that now. A single person may realize. Or they may be a married person who has a strong craving and appetite for it. It's managing them and they're not managing it. And it's bringing a great deal of conflict into the marriage, into their relationship with their wife. And if the wife were to say to him, "You got to make a choice, porn or me," would he be able to? How's he going to do that? That's a complicated matter. That's a complicated relational thing. We're going to get to that soon. But anyway, what I would like to do is take this video to address this matter with the single men who have found themselves now for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years and they're still single, but they have delved into pornography on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. They've combined with a sexual experience of masturbation, orgasm, and now they find themselves with this very, very, very strong appetite. And and if they've bought what I've said here, and they are going to, if they can predict that their wife will say to them, you've got to make a choice. If it's either me or pornography, but you can't have both, and there's no compromise in this matter. Now this single guy has some really he's in a really a difficult place. He's got this craving, he's got this huge appetite, he's got this habit, he's got this addiction, and now he thinks, how can I get married? And if you followed any of these videos earlier about pornography, I've said to men that if you have an addiction to pornography, if you dabble in pornography, if you have a habit of pornography and orgasm, and if you have an addiction to pornography and orgasm, this really disqualifies you from marriage. It really does. You cannot get married bringing this addiction into a marriage because it's foolish, number one, to have any kind of an addiction and bring that into a marriage. But number two, an addiction and a habit and a craving in a sexual context where the Bible is so strict about being sexual in relationship to one person, but you've done it to 1,536 women by way of the internet, well, now you find yourself with a very serious problem. So, single guys, what does the Bible say about this particular matter, about what you now, if it's legitimate for a wife to say to her husband, there's no compromise in this area. If you want to marry me, you cannot be doing pornography. Well, what's the Bible say about this matter for the husband, a sexual man, a single man, I should say, or even a single woman? But let me again bring it back to the men here. Listen to what 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 says to single men, as it has to do about marriage, as it addresses marriage for you, and more particularly, what does this passage say about how to acquire a wife? You're a single guy. You want to acquire a wife. Does the Bible say anything about that? It sure does. Listen to what it says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I'm going to read it twice. It is God's will that you should be holy, that you should avoid sexual immorality, and that each of you should learn how to acquire his own wife in a way that is holy and honorable, and not in passionate lust, like the non-Christians who do not know God. And that in this matter, that is, in this matter of finding a wife in a proper way, not according to dishonor, sexual immorality, passionate lust like the non-Christians, but rather finding a wife in a way that's honorable and sexually pure and self-controlled, that in this matter of finding a wife, no one should wrong his brother or take advantage of him. The Lord will punish men for all such sins, as we have already told you and warned you. For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life. Therefore, he who rejects this instruction on how to acquire a wife or how to acquire a husband, he who instructs this advice, this instruction, does not reject God, man, does not reject Paul, does not reject Jeff Stark, but rather he who rejects this instruction, it says here, rejects God who gives you his Holy Spirit. Now let me read it one more time, that first part. Single men. I'm going to add some commentary along the way here. Single men, single women, but for our purposes here, single men. It is God's will that you be holy, that each of you should avoid, that is, abstain and have nothing to do with. That's what that word avoid means. It means to abstain. If you were to abstain from food, you'd have no food. If you were to abstain from swimming, there would be no swimming. If you were to abstain from alcohol, you would cut off your alcohol. If you were to abstain from sexual immorality and lust, then you would cut it out. And that's exactly what he's saying here. It is God's will that you should be holy and that you should avoid or abstain from sexual immorality. Now, sexual immorality, by the way, is porneia, interestingly enough, but it's a very broad term. It includes bestiality, pedophilia, it involves adultery, but it also means sex outside of marriage as a single person. Let me read it again. It is God's will that you should be holy, that each of you should abstain from sexual immorality, and that each of you single men, should learn how to acquire his own wife in a way that is holy, and sexually honorable, and not in passionate lust like the heathen or the non-Christians who do not know God. And that in this matter of acquiring a wife, no one should wrong his brother or take advantage of him. The Lord will punish men for all such sins, as we have already told you. Okay, men, single guys. You didn't know it when you started looking at pornography when you were 10 years old, but you kept on doing it. And your parents took your iPad away, took your computer away, warned you about this, but you didn't pay attention. You were stupid like we all are. But you know what? They went to bed and you looked at it on your computer, you looked at it on your phone, you dabbled around. It was curious, it was interesting, it was attractive to you at a young age. But then at some point, as a young boy, you got an erection and you had orgasm with it, and then you found out that the two were to be together, and that is, it was erotic, it was stimulating, you would get an erection, and then you would culminate it by masturbating, and that became now, so those two things now, you did that when you were 10. That grew into something, a sexual thing when you were 11 and 12. It continued to do it in your 13s, when you were 14, when you were 15, and when you were 16, continuing to look at hundreds and thousands of pictures, culminating that with now a sexual experience of masturbation and orgasm. You got to college, you continued to do it, perhaps videos and other means to that. But and for over the decade of from 10 to 20 and to 25, you continue to do it all the way along the way, saying to yourself, nobody knows. This is an innocent thing. I can stop anytime when I want to. And when you tried to stop, you couldn't, but you thought, well, I'll stop next time, but you haven't. And now you find yourself at 25, 26, 27 years old, wanting to acquire a wife, but you've got this habit and this huge, huge craving, and perhaps you might even be at a point where you have an addiction. What are you going to do? Well, you have to push the pause button about acquiring a wife. And you've got to take the time to learn how to live a self-controlled, sexually self-controlled, sexually pure, and sexually faithful life before God before you can push the play button and go back into acquiring a wife. It says here that each of you should avoid sexual immorality, and that each of you should learn how to acquire a wife in a way that is holy and honorable. Now, you've not learned how to do that yet. You've not learned how to be sexually honorable and holy. So you've got to push the pause button in terms of acquiring a wife. And now you have to go about the process of learning how to be honorable and holy in your sexual life as a single person. You've got to learn how to do this. You can't learn this after you get married. You should not be fooling yourself and saying, well, once I get married, then I can have a wife, and my wife will be obligated to take care of me in this way, and I'll take care of her, and I'll take care of this matter when I get married. No, marriage does not solve this problem. Marriage will not solve this problem that you have spent 15, 16, 17 years acquiring. You've earned this addiction. You've earned this craving. I did not have this craving as a single person, but I did when it came to drinking alcohol. I am a recovering alcoholic. How did I become an alcoholic? Because for 10, 15, 20 years, I drank thousands and thousands and thousands of times things I shouldn't have been drinking at times that I should not be drinking, and drinking when I should never have been drinking. I earned that addiction. I earned that craving. I earned that label of an alcoholic. Nobody made me do it. I did it, and I did it by making thousands and thousands of choices to drink in ways that were inappropriate. And then I found myself in a state of being an alcoholic. You've made those decisions too. Now you're a guy, 25 years old, having done this for at least 10 years or more, and you find yourself with this craving and habit. What do you got to do? You have to push the pause button, and you have to learn now how to sexually be honorable and holy in your sexual life now and for an extended period of time. And then when you've learned how to do that, then you can push the play button. Then you can go about continuing to be sexually honorable and holy in your sexual experience. Because when your girlfriend says to you, just short of becoming engaged, hey, where do you stand in sexual manners? Are you holy? Are you honorable? Or do you do pornography? You want to be able to say to her, I used to do pornography, and with pornography, I used to do masturbation, orgasm, but I have learned how to be holy and honorable in my sexual experience. And no, I have a habit, and I have a season of a year or two of being able to learn how to be honorable and holy in my sexual experience. And I have every intention of continuing that once I get married with the woman that I happen to be wanting to get married to, and that happens to be you, and you'll be able to tell her. Now, once you get married, you're going to be able to have sex now with your wife. And you know what that's going to do? Is that going to decrease this appetite of yours for sex, or is it going to increase it? Well, what you're going to find is now that you can have sex, and if you can have sex frequently, it's going to grow that appetite. That appetite's not going to go away. Sex has an appetite to it. And you're going to need to apply the tools that you learned as a single person on how to be holy and honorable. You're going to have to apply those tools in marriage on how to stay holy and honorable. And you're going to have to work at it really hard. Now that you're having sex and feeding that appetite, you're going to have to even work harder being a sexually holy and honorable person now as a married person. You're going to have to take all those tools that you learned, we're told here, learned as a single person that enabled you to become sexually self-controlled. You're going to have to apply those same tools even harder now that you get married, because now you're growing that appetite because you're able to have sex now with your wife. So, single guys, let me ask you this question. Are you sleeping with your girlfriend? Are you sleeping with your fiance? You have to stop. You have to abstain. And you have to learn at this point in time how to be sexually honorable and holy now You need to learn those tools and practice that sexual sobriety and self-control. Because if you don't, you're going to enter into marriage with this habit, this addiction, this appetite. And marriage is not going to take away the problem. Marriage can't take away the problem. And don't be fooled and don't be deceived in thinking that marriage is going to solve this problem, because it's not. It's going to grow the problem, not diminish the problem. And you're going to have to take care of it right now. So go to your girlfriend and say, look, you and I need, I'm going to suggest that you and I look at a video that I saw put out by Jeff Stark about this matter of sex as a single person, sex as a married person. I think I'd like to ask you to watch this with me, because I think we need to pay attention to what it has to say if we're considering as because we're sexual with each other. And would you watch this video with me? Now, you might lose a girlfriend. She might say, what? No, I don't want to stop having sex. And if you're not going to have sex with me, well, I'll find another boyfriend who will have sex with me. And in that case, you might have to say, then I'll have to say goodbye, because I really can't compromise in this area. Okay, let's review very quickly here. Was it legitimate for my wife to say, Jeff, if you want to do pornography as a husband, we're not going to be able to be close. If you really want to be close, you can't do that. There's no compromise. I think it was entirely legitimate for my wife to say that. But there's huge consequences for that. If that's true, then there are single guys who have grown up with this strong appetite and habit and addiction, who are looking forward to acquiring a wife. And so what Paul is saying here has to be implemented in the life of a single guy now, who might have a much stronger appetite than I had when my wife was telling me this in the context of our marriage. In the next video, we're going to address what this means for a husband and a wife who now is married, and this husband for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years has been looking at pornography, doing masturbation, and now has this craving and this appetite and this habit and perhaps even an addiction. And now they're faced, the husband and wife is faced with the same dilemma that might be necessary to have the same conversation that my wife and I had. And if they were to have that conversation, that the resolution of that between that husband and wife, the wife who wants her husband to quit, but the husband now has an addiction in this area, it's a very complicated matter. And what I want to do in our next video is try to unpack that for a husband and wife a wife who finds herself having to say this to the husband, but the husband has a much more difficult problem in this area than I had when my wife had that conversation with me. It's complicated, but the Holy Spirit wants to help husbands and wives in those ways. And so we'll look at that in our next video together.